I would like to call a regular board meeting for November of the Union County Board of Education order this time. We'd like to welcome all visitors and guests, and we're glad you're with us tonight. We've already had our invocation during our work session, and at this time, we'd like to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First thing on our agenda is approval of our agenda.
We'd add one thing, Mr. Chairman, we just got the results back on the milestone testing, and Dr. Williams prepared a couple of slides to show you where our students are.
Okay. Where do you want to add that at after number 3, after financials?
Well, let's do it first, I guess.
Okay,
Yeah, let's do it first.
we'll do it first, okay. All right. I entertain the motion to approve the agenda submitted plus with this one addition with the slides.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chair.
I'll second.
All those in favor? Unanimous. Next on our agenda is approval of our minutes from our previous meeting. I'm sure I had those emailed to you. Are there any questions or any concerns about that, or anything need to be added by our minutes? If not, I entertain the approval of our minutes as submitted.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
All those in favor? Next on our agenda is presentations and discussions.
This is the first year, 2015, that just finished up. This was the first year that the state changed their whole direction in which they were going. If you look at the slides, the Georgia Milestones Assessment replaced what was formerly known as CRCT and EOCT. CRCT was your Criterion Reference Competency Test that was administered in grades 3 through 8, reading, language arts, math, science, and social studies, and then your EOCTs, you wind up having 2 in language arts, 2 in math, 2 in science, and 2 in social studies. That was at the high school level. What the state did is they went in and they said, you know, with the new curriculum that the state's using, we need a test that aligns all the way from grades 3 through 12. So rather than having one group that says we've got CRCT and another group that says we have EOCT, let's actually look at something that's going to be vertical, grades 3 through 12. 2015 was the first year of that. And there were a lot of challenges because it was new. When we had CRCT for about 15 years, we knew what we were getting. But the biggest challenge about that was we felt like there was some information in there that wasn't accurate. For example, we would have 98, 99, 100% of our kids passing the CRCT. It's hard for me to believe that 100% of the kids are on grade level in 1 year. And you're talking about 100% of the kids being able to read on that grade level within that year, because we administer some formative assessments during the school year where we wind up seeing how the kids are growing during the course of the year and what opportunities we're providing them, whether it's morning tutoring, Saturdays, whether it's the after-school program we offer, whether it's the summer program we offer. We want to make sure that our kids that are not on grade level are getting some type of opportunity to exceed, to excel, to hopefully get on grade level. So we'll look at the results here. They made a couple of changes. In the past, they would take 5th grade writing and 8th grade writing, but now they said we're going to have writing in all of it. And honestly, that was our biggest challenge this year, was the writing component. Reading, we did well, but they took reading and language arts and they combined them into one test. We still have math, we still have science, we still have social studies. So I want to share with you a few slides. In language arts, what you're seeing are grades 3rd through 8th, plus 9th grade lit and American lit. American lit is offered in 11th grade. So students, they have the Georgia Milestones from 3rd grade all the way up through 9th grade. They don't take it in 10th because that's British lit. Then they take it in 11th grade, which is American lit. The biggest change between the way the results are reported in the past to the way they're reported now is the fact that you had does not meet, meets, and exceeds in the past. Now you have 4 different levels: beginning, developing, proficient, and distinguished. we're just like every other school system in the state of Georgia. We're kind of curious about how this is going to unfold. When the state first came out with the results, we wanted to see how we did, and we wanted to see how it compared to previous years. When you look at language arts, in the purple at the bottom, you can see beginning, developing is the next level, and then you have 2 levels of proficient and distinguished. There's still a lot of questions that are unanswered right now as far as what is the state considering passing. Some of them sometimes will say it's level 3 and 4, others will say it's levels 2, 3, and 4. What we wanted to do was give you a reference point. And that reference point is that white dotted line that you see here, here, and so forth. You see where our purple section, for example, in 3rd grade, we had 23.5% of the kids at the beginning level. The state was actually around 32%. So it gives us an opportunity to compare what was our beginning rate versus what was the state's rate. Because what that tells us is, first of all, how are we compared to the state, but also which of these kids are we trying to reach. And I'll tell you that with the assessments that we used during the school year that guide the instruction, this fell more in line with what we're already seeing with the students that we're serving. But if you look across the bottom of that, you can see that the purple areas goes from 23.5, which is the highest percentage of the students that were at the beginning level, and then it goes down to 14.4, 19.2, 18.5, 18.3, 14, 14.3, and 12.8. You can see in 3rd through 8th grade where the state rate was. The reason 9th grade literature and American literature do not have the state is they actually administered in 2 different windows. Grades 3 through 8 is always administered at the end of April and the 1st of May across the state, regardless of what kind of calendar they have. What that means, though, at the high school level, we're on 4x4 block, where you take 4 classes first semester, 4 classes second semester, just like college, except, of course, you took more than 4 classes. But what we wind up seeing is we get 2 reports, one in the winter and one in the spring. What the state hasn't done is given us one full picture of the state data on that. Because we may offer it in winter and spring, but the state, you may have different high schools across the state of Georgia that do 7-period days, year-long versus a 4x4, the way we do it. So that's why the white dotted lines are not there. But you can see across the board, Mr. Stepp and I were at a superintendent's meeting this morning with Pioneer Resa, which serves our district, and they showed the results there. And I can tell you that in language arts, out of the 14 Northeast Georgia school systems, we were number 2 when you factor in grades 3 through 8. We were very proud of that. It's about where we've been in the past, so we were very pleased with that. When you look at math, math looks a little different. Now, coordinate algebra and analytic geometry, those purple numbers that you see all the way out to the right, are much better than they were on the previous test. I'll tell you that the 2 previous years, that the 2014 and 2013 CRC or EOCT was released, the state rate for passing, the state rate was 35 and 30%. So 35% on coordinate algebra and analytic geometry had 30%. So although we still have more kids failing than we need to have failing, as far as at that 17.4 and 23.6, it was more in line with what we saw across the state when it came to a beginning level on mathematics. We have about 200 students per grade level. So for us, it's very simple to look at any of those numbers and double it. So we know we've got about 17 kids in 3rd grade that didn't pass math, and we know where to target that instruction. We know where to help them. About 15 kids in 4th grade. But you can see the math, you can see on the distinguished side how we compared. In math, across Pioneer Resa districts, we were number 1 across the 14 Northeast Georgia school districts. And that's Banks, Dawson, Fannin, Franklin, Gainesville, Hab, Hall, Hart, Lumpkin, Raven, Stevens, Towns, us, and White. Those are the 14 districts we're talking about. So when you look at those, we fared very well. We were first in 3rd grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, and 8th grade. And in some of those cases, it wasn't even close where we were. So we're very proud of the math results with the results that came out with the milestones. Before I show science, I want to preface it with, back in the days of AYP, Adequate Yearly Progress, when they started all of that, a lot of games were played across the state for many reasons, unfortunate reasons. If a kid, there were certain windows that had to be there. There were things that some schools didn't do. One of them was, most of them, or a lot of them, did not teach science and social studies. Because during the old days of AYP, it was strictly about how you did on reading, language arts, and math. Well, if they know that's what they're being graded on, if they know that's what the newspapers are going to run, well, why am I teaching science and social studies? Fortunately, we always taught science and social studies. So when you look at science, you can see we did well there again as well. 5.3% failed in third grade, 11, and so forth. Physical science, one thing I do want to point out about physical science, that's predominantly our 8th grade, and we've got about 20 high schoolers that took it. In the past few years, we've tried to dip physical science down to the middle school level so that they can take an end of course. Because the biggest thing we saw was the level of math they're doing in 8th grade now compared to the level of math we used to do. They can do the math that supports the end of course. So why not give those kids that chance to have that high school credit in middle school when we know they're capable of that level of math? So when you see the physical science portion there, some of those kids actually took 8th grade, which is physical science, but also physical science for the end of course, which are 2 different tests. And then biology looks great. Across the board, you look at the distinguished levels, we were much higher than the state on those. Very proud of what we did in biology. I think those are the best biology results we've ever had. And when you go back to factor EOC. When you look at science across the RESA districts in grades 3 through 8, we were number 1 there as well. So we're very proud of those accomplishments. You look at social studies. Social studies in grades 3, 4, and 5, you can see are pretty low. 6, 7, 8, they go up a little bit, and then U.S. history and econ stay about the same. We've always had success with economics, and I believe we were top again in the region with economics. And you're looking at about 35 kids for our district that failed. But when you look at the number across the state, you're looking at about 25% across the state as far as failing grades 3 through 8. This was the first year of the milestones. I believe Mr. Murphy had a parent meeting tonight with middle school and elementary school parents to show them some of the results, to show them what the student report looks like, so that they know, first of all, what challenges their child may be having, but also what we're doing to help support them in those challenges. So these are the results for this year. It looks a little different from what we've seen in the past. The failure rates are higher than they've been in the past because the test did change, but they're more in line with what we see our students struggling in, which is in most cases, it's the reading comprehension and the writing. And so we're glad to have data that supports both on the state level, but also the local level as far as what our challenges are. Anything you'd like to add?
Well, I know a couple of years ago, we realized that the standards under the old CRCTs wasn't what we thought they should be. So we went out and we found some other states and we started putting our standards the same place some of the other places were, like Massachusetts and Connecticut and some of those, because they had higher standards. And I think that's really helped our students because our expectations have been higher than what a lot of the other schools in Georgia have been, and it made a difference.
What I think was the most challenging part for us as educators is going to a family and saying, yes, your kid passed the test, but they still struggle in reading. Well, if they're struggling in reading, why are they passing every test? If we know they can't read, why are they passing every test? So this data now aligns with what we've seen at the local level, which has been for us has been a very nice support. And they're numbers that are manageable. They're not, some districts we've seen, they'll have 50% of the kids failing. There was in one district that did not have a large diversity of population that was in a rural area that they were well above, actually a little bit above 50, and we were very surprised that they were at that level. And those are the hard questions. What's nice for us is we have consistency. If you wind up going to some other system to look at some of their data, they may be up in one grade level but down in another. For us, we've been able to be consistent and at least be up near that top quartile of performance. And that's something we're real proud of. The teachers have done an excellent job in taking the changes that we've had over the last 10 years, especially your high school math teachers. I believe they've had, Mr. Hill, 4 curriculum changes in 7 years, 8 years?
8 years. I believe 8 years they've had 4 different curriculums.
Now we'll sit there and say, well, math is math, but they'll move this unit over here to this grade level and this one over here. It's very difficult to find quality math teachers, because a lot of the kids that have been through the math over the last 10 years, it's really not a strength with as many as it used to be. And so being able to find quality teachers, once we get a great one, we hire them and then hang on to them as long as we can. So this is a great testament to the amount of work that our teachers put into it, that our students rose to the occasion. And parents just went along with us to make sure that any supports that we needed, they provided, whether it was at school, whether it was at home, just really helped us be able to continue what we've seen in the past.
And two, we have good leadership at our schools too. We have some good administrators, and that makes a lot of difference. Gotta have leadership.
I think one of the things you're not going to see on here, and Mr. Stepp and I talk about this a good bit, in a system our size, we're very fortunate. We have Woody Gap, and then we have the schools in Blairsville that are all K-12. So those conversations can happen K-12. It's not 4 or 5 elementary schools that all have a different vision, that all have a different philosophy. They go to 2 different middle schools that have completely different philosophies and visions. Then they go to a high school and they say, where do these kids come from? You know, because we've never seen those middle school teachers, and the middle school teachers say, we've never seen those elementary teachers. We're fortunate that we can have those conversations. These kids, most of them are in with their peer group for 13 years. So you know the expectation of what's expected of the kids. And it's been a true blessing to be able to see that growth with the students that we have. I believe that's all we have for milestones.
That's good. Any questions about that?
Mr. Chair, you'll move on to the second
Yes.
one.
Please do, Jim.
Unfortunately, this one's gonna be longer. Mr. Stepp, you know, kick us off on this one.
Well, this one is concerning, and you folks need to be able to see this, because we've been following this for some time. The governor appointed a committee to redo the way schools and education is funded in the state of Georgia. We'd been under a program called the Basic Education, or Quality Basic Education Plan. That's started in 1983, I believe. 86. But anyway, it never was fully funded. They said, they told us what it took to educate children. They gave us a number, but they never funded us to that number. So we were always low as far as the funding we got from the state of Georgia. And by the way, the state constitution in Georgia says that every student should have the right, if they live in Georgia, to a quality education. So it's a state responsibility. This new committee that's putting this together, they've come up with a formula, and it looks okay on the surface, but I think it has some long-term ramifications, especially for us. Let me ask you a question. How many of you people in this room are taxpayers in Union County? Raise your hand. So there's a lot of us in here. Well, you need to perk your ears up, because your taxes may go up in the next few years, so you need to watch what's getting ready to come down the pike. So, Dr. Williams, I'll let you take over from here, and then we'll interject some things along the way just to give you some insights on what's happening.
Mr. Stepp and I got the privilege to speak to the Pioneer Research Superintendents and Curriculum Directors about 2 weeks ago about this, and there's one thing that Mr. Stepp talked about, QBE, and when FTE and QBE, as we see it now, which is our funding formula, went into effect in 1986, it's a system that's now been in place for almost 30 years. We as a school system do our best to make sure that if a kid is placed in a certain classroom, that we get the amount of funding that's due us for having that child in that classroom. Larger systems don't have the eyes on it that we're able to have on it. And so for us, you're going to see a little bit later on, there's going to be some districts in Georgia that are coming out. For example, one, I believe Gwinnett's getting $27 million more out of this funding formula. They're the highest. And when you look at the top 25 enrollment districts in the state of Georgia, they're getting about 3.5% of an increase on their funds, while those of us more in the range we are getting about 1.5%. So you're talking about the bigger districts getting even more money. And they have righted or wrong in that some South Georgia districts are finally getting some more state money, because when they're already maxed out at 20 mills, there's no more room for them to go without some type of resolution to go above 20. I believe there are 5 districts in Georgia that are above, or they're either at 20 or above 20. There's even one, I believe, at 25.4 mills in Georgia. So the way it works now is in the first Tuesday in October, we do a FTE day, and that means full-time equivalent. So any schedule we have on that day is what gets sent off to the state, and the state says, based on this and some other calculations, here's the pot of money you receive. We get an allotment sheet every year, and that's how we set our budget. We say, okay, this year we're getting X number of dollars from the state. The way it's going to be proposed, in the past, grades 9 through 12 was the base funding. So in other words, they're saying whatever it takes to educate a child is what it takes to educate a high school child. Any kid that's not high school is going to take more money to fund. If they're kindergarten, they're going to cost more than a high school student to fund. If they're kindergarten early intervention, they're going to cost more than your kindergarten student. So we've got 19 different categories in the state of Georgia. They said that's way too many, we need to trim it down some. What they've changed is the base enrollment. And the base enrollment is actually now going to be grades 6 through 8. So rather than in the past, them saying it's grades 9 through 12, they're saying it's now going to be grades 6 through 8. This is the state funding. So when you look at the base funding, just because of the number of kids we have, we collect about $4 billion, or $4 billion goes towards education straight off the bat of having those kids in a seat in Union County or any other district in the state of Georgia. What they've proposed now is a little different. They're now proposing these categories go on top of the base. So every kid is going to be the base. If you wind up being a kid in K-3, you're going up getting $666.81. I wish they would change the 666 number, but that's just me. Just go up one more, make it a cool 667, and we'll be all right. But all of those, so in other words, a kid can have multiple categories. It's not just one. So what if I have a base student who winds up being a K-3 student who also is an ESOL? And ESOL is English Speakers of Other Languages. And I don't know why that number is wide. I apologize for that. And economically disadvantaged, that's on here. They could also be gifted. So all of those little pots, all of those individual amount per enrollment gets added to that 23-2209. That's how they're proposing the funding. The challenge with this is going to be, the first thing that pops up, and our principals have not seen this before, the first thing they're going to look at and say, okay, K-3, that's pretty straightforward, 4, 5, and 6, 8, 9, 12. CTAE is pretty straightforward. That's career tech ag education. They're enrolled in the course, they've got it. Esau we spoke about, what about economically disadvantaged? That's ED, that's your poverty kids. Now, right now, at the beginning of the year, we send out forms and they say, tell us what your wages are. Your family's wages, are you one home income, or a one parent income, 2 parent income, and then that comes back. Well, that's not the way they're going to identify economically disadvantaged students anymore. It's going to be completely different. It's going to be based on direct certification. And direct certification are students who receive services under the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. Temporary assistance for needy families, that's your TANF. And then your homeless students, your foster students, or migrant students. So any student that has that label will automatically qualify as economically disadvantaged. To give you an idea, we currently have 8 migrant students. Actually, no. 5 of them fell off this past week. We'll have 3 more that come off in December. So that'll be 0 migrant students that we have in Union County. We do have some foster students. We have about 65 or more homeless students in Union County. Now, homeless student can mean anywhere from true homeless that you're thinking about to doubled up, where many families nowadays will decide that I want my child and their children to come live with us. Well, they're now counting that as doubled up. They count that as homeless. It all depends on if the family wants to count that as homeless or not. But those 5 categories there will automatically qualify. For example, Woody Gap School, they receive free breakfast and free lunch because of their percentage of students that are direct certified. That's how kids will be identified. So it won't be, well, hey, be sure you go home and fill out this form because we want to make sure we get more funding for you. It's going to be easy across the board and straightforward. One of the things that's been a biggest change for us is the way they do special education students. Special education is the same way. You wind up getting a base, and then you'll have different categories. The state had to adjust it to make it even with this year, so they took away $740,000. But that also is on top of, what if they're a K-3 student, a 4-5 student, a 6-8, a 9-12? You could have a base student that's a high school student who's in the CTAE course, who's economically disadvantaged and also SPED. They'd wind up getting 5 categories. So all of that would wind up being added on top of it. And it all sounds well and good, and it's amazing though when they do the calculations how close they come out to what they are now as far as what the state's putting into the pot of money, but it's different in the impact it's going to have on us as a system. The biggest change about special education is the fact that it's going from segment-based. In other words, if you had 6 segments in a day, so you had 6 classes a day, how many were co-taught, how many were resource? Now it's changing to how many minutes a week they're served. My fear is you'll have some unethical places across the state of Georgia that'll tweak it just 15 minutes more to go from one category to the next. That's my concern. That's going to be a whole different OCR issue, and the state says, well, if the district does that, that's on the district. Somebody can report them, and they can go through the Office of Civil Rights. But my fear is going to wind up being these numbers as tight as they are, because a segment for us may wind up being 45 minutes like it is at the primary school, or a segment we may wind up being 65, 70 minutes at the middle school. So it all depends on in the past what a segment was, but now it's straight time. And who determines this time? It's the IEP team. So the individualized education plan, that team comes together and they decide what services are needed, the duration of those services, the frequency of those services, and so forth. Right now, we don't collect this information. We don't collect how much time a kid is served, so that's going to have to be added. So as we go through this, some of the questions Mr. Stepp and I thought about is, first of all, how is funding going to be determined? Because if you're talking about a student, right now it's based on that October FTE count. The problem is if we're a 4x4 district at the high school, like I mentioned earlier, versus a high school that's got 7 period days, who's going to have the ability to add more of those classifications in? 7 period day is. So they're going to make sure that their kids got a CTAE course. They're going to make sure they got a gifted course if they qualify for gifted services. We don't know yet how that's going to be calculated. We don't know if they're going to use an average, if they're going to use fall and spring, just fall, 2/3 fall, 1/3 spring. We don't know, but they'll say, well, that'll come down the road. I'd kind of like to know now so we can know how it's truly going to impact us as a system. You've also got weights. It's ironic sometimes here's what I'll say about this. The weights adjust sometimes from year to year. And usually it adjusts in order to balance the budget from the state. So, we don't know how this is going to be adjusted in the future. But the question that I've got, and it's interesting because they say the amount per student, so that $23,2209, is actually going up $106.58 per student. But what they've done is they've taken this allotment sheet that we've had now for almost 30 years, and we know specifically what amount of funds are being allocated for direct instruction, indirect instruction, nurses, transportation, media is in there, training and experience. We know all of those things to kind of know what kind of line item we get for those services. Because usually it's not enough money, so in order to provide the service, we wind up using general fund to help make that difference out because the state doesn't give us hardly anything for nurses at all. But when you look at like T&E is training and experience, and that's years of experience and degrees. We get credit now for teachers that we have in our system based on what percentage we are above the state average. But what's interesting to me is if you take this amount, they say, well, you're getting $110 per student for the technology, and you're getting $52.60 for the T&E difference. Okay, you put those together, you get $162.60. But the amount per kid's only going up $106.58. So there's already a difference there. But when you back out your direct cost, your direct instructional cost, your indirect instructional cost, your media, your staff development, your nursing, your transportation, what is the true amount per kid that we're going to be receiving now? Because it's obviously not going to be what it was in the past. And that's what we're worried about. The question I'm going to ask a little bit later is, since these are not included as line items anymore, does that mean we have to provide them? Do we have to provide transportation? Do we have to provide media? Do we have to provide professional development?
See, on our budget now that we get from the state, there's a line item for nurses, there's a line item for media, there's a line item for counselors, all those kind of things. Well, that's going to go away, and that's being your base allotment. So it's hard to tell, are we getting what it's gonna take to actually fund those positions? Or is that something we're gonna have to make up at the local level if we have them? So that's where the questions are.
Let me hit a little bit here on continuation of it. Student earnings, all of the tables you saw prior to this come out to about $5.3 million, or billion dollars, sorry, 5.3 billion. The state average salary, if they took every teacher in the state of Georgia and they found what the average state salary was, that's how much money is included. It's just over $2 billion. What's interesting is the next row, and that's T&E per committee hold harmless. Y'all all know what the term hold harmless means? I mean, at some point it's gonna be gone. The bad part about this is that's $38 million, excuse me, looking at the wrong one. That's almost $90 million that basically is gonna go away with time from this state funding formula. And what it is a district like us. How much are we above the state average salary? We have one of the top 5 most experienced educating staff in the state of Georgia. So that means we are higher, I think we're about 50, actually about 65% higher than the base amount. That means in time, that amount, which actually is close to $1 million, is going to go away at some point. Now, the good news is, it's as it phases out, so it's as our teachers come off. So you're really looking at about a 30-year span, which sounds nice, but my bet would be in 10 years, they're going to say, we're cutting it off now. Since it's held harmless, we didn't tell you how long you'd have it. We're going to cut it off now to help balance the budget. So I'm worried about that because that's $90 million across the state of Georgia. Central office costs are about 38. Mountain Education Charter High School actually gets an additional amount because of their, they have an agreement with the state to get funded at a level a little different, so they're keeping that in there. Low enrollment, we'll talk about in just a moment. Charter school supplement, we actually get some of, no, we do not get that money, we get some of the charter systems money. We get about $250,000 a year because we're a charter system. So I want to talk real briefly about the compensation. Here's the biggest difference. You take all of the teachers we have today, if they were to implement this and say they pass it legislature this year, so the following year it goes into effect. Any teacher that we have on the payroll right now will stay on the current pay scale we have now. So their years' experience, their degrees, their local supplement, all that stuff would wind up staying, unless they decide to opt in to a new compensation scale. Because what the state's forcing us to do is they're saying, yeah, we don't really think years of experience and degrees really have an impact on anything in the classroom. We're going to pay you strictly on the effectiveness within your classroom. So there's no incentive really to go back and have professional development, to get a degree. And I will be honest, there are some factory mills out there that will be happy to give you a diploma and do all kinds of stuff like that. There are some of those out there. But for the most part, what you learn in those classes and how you apply them truly do make you a better teacher. And I feel like the biggest challenge we're going to face is a staff that's going to get confused about this. Because all they're hearing right now, and principals, y'all probably heard it too, is they said, well, I hear the state's adopting a new compensation scale. Everybody that's currently employed will continue to be on it. The problem's going to be attracting new people to the education. Because now, well, if you just went and couldn't get a job because it was too heavy of a market last year and you went ahead and got your master's degree, now you're going to get a job maybe, but you're not going to get paid on that master's degree. You're not going to get credit for it. That's going to be a bit of a challenge. Where I see the biggest problem we face is, as a district, we do have a very high-end years experience and degrees. The state is benefiting from us paying that. So in other words, that state average salary, it's counting on those districts above the average to help bring it up. So other districts that are below that average are benefiting because right now we have teachers that have more years of experience, that have higher degrees, and other districts are benefiting from that. And that's what they're going to hold harmless from us. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge, but here's some other stuff. Last year was the first year we implemented a new evaluation system. We didn't do it as a system. The state says, here you go. You're going to do a new evaluation system. I believe, principals, how much time does it take per employee to do a year-long evaluation? Well, y'all think about that while I explain what all's done. You have to have a pre-conference. You have to have a self-assessment. You have to do one walkthrough, another walkthrough, a 30-minute observation, a mid-year conference, another walkthrough, another 30-minute formative observation, and an end-of-year conference per certified staff.
It's close to 10 hours for.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, so, Mr. Hill, you got about 100 teachers? So, there's 1,000 hours that's dedicated by his administrative staff, either basically doing evaluation. Hopefully, out of this committee, the reform committee, they're changing some things that says, okay, if you've had X number of years of successful observations and walkthroughs, you only have to do one every 3 years or something like that. But right now, it is a heck of a burden to get all of that done. What it keeps you from doing is really focusing in on the employees you need to focus in on in order to help them improve, especially when you're talking about new staff. When you're talking about teachers that are new to the profession, or they may be from a different district and they're trying to learn some of our programs or how we do things, they need more time than somebody who's been here 10, 15, 20 years. Use that person as a mentor to help bring that person along. So that the bad part about that is all of these compensation scales, they've said it has to be tied to teacher effectiveness. Right now, teacher effectiveness is determined by two things. One is your administrator. Half of it is your administrator. The other half is your growth, whether it's on an individual thing they call a student learning objective called a SLO, which is kind of funny that they call it a SLO. That's a slow process. But it's a beginning of the year and end of the year assessment, and it takes time. Anybody who has the milestones we showed just a few moments ago, they have that part. So either they have a SLO or a milestones type thing. The challenging part now is you're putting basically 50% of a teacher's compensation in the hands of building level administration. Imagine the stress and the pressure that puts on an administration to not give a bad score, to not give a needs development, to not give an ineffective. And I personally don't think it's fair. That's the question we proposed to the committee is that fair that you're putting, you know, you've got a system like ours where all of our administrators in the school have working on their third or more years. What about some of these systems that have turnover every year? And you've got a new administrator trying to be friends with everybody. And, you know, are you really having the conversations with that small percentage of people that really need those conversations? I'm worried about that one. Another one I'm worried about, they haven't said it, but this is a sneaky way of getting it in there, and that is, what if somebody goes from Fannin County to Union County, or Towns County to Union County? Do they automatically give up that T&E we talked about a minute ago? Do they automatically go into the new funding formula of that compensation scale? If that's the case, you're not going to have many people moving counties. So you're not going to be able to attract quality teachers from neighboring counties. I'll tell you that over the last few years, we've had some great applicants that we've had to turn away. But I guarantee that if they put this in there, where you lose that T&E, if you switch from one district to the next, those number of applicants will dwindle down to probably a tenth of the number of applicants we've seen in the past. And that's a concern for me. Another one, this is the funding formula as far as new hires will then have potential to earn more than traditionally paid. I talked a little bit about that before, but I'll move on to the next one. Here's another one. What about people coming from North Carolina? What about people coming from different states that want to teach here? They want to relocate here. They want to be a part of the community. Where will they go? If they're coming from a different state and they're used to getting credit for their master's degree and 25 years experience, should they not get credit for that here? No, they're going to have to go into the new scale. A lot of questions that we've still got that have not been answered. Central office, just to give you a quick one on it. The state, remember these numbers were based on 1986. The state says for a superintendent, a secretary, 1 accountant, and 2 to 12 assistant superintendents. Let me clarify that. 2 to 12 depends on your size. If you're below 5,000, you get 2. If you're 5,000 to 10,000, you get 4. And you can see the progression as it goes up. But if your enrollment's below 5,000, which is us, we wind up getting $157,400 from the state for that. On the 1986 numbers, we got just under $180,000 for that. So it's going to be a challenge with all of these different, I mentioned the evaluation system, I mentioned the student learning objectives, federal programs. The state keeps putting more and more on the central office and the schools every year. It's really crazy over the last 10 years what all's been added, even the last 3 years. Talking to one of the administrators the other day, and we were talking about a teacher that's been out of education for a couple of years, and they said they have no idea the breakneck speed at which we do things now. And Ms. Towers back there nodding her head, and it's one of those things, let's get on it and go. You really don't get enough time anymore to really think about what are some things that we need to tweak, because you're constantly going to whatever the state or the federal office is demanding. The other part is, I mentioned this earlier, will we have to provide those services, direct and indirect, for media, staff development, nursing, transportation? My belief is, yeah, you provide them. But that's going to be a question that's going to be coming up, I'm sure, at some point of, wait a minute, if it's not in the budget anymore, do we have to do it? Well, there's actually, I think it's an old law, Mr. Stepp, you may know for sure, not saying, you've been around a while or anything.
I was probably there when they wrote it, when the earth was cooling.
Yeah. But if you're within, I believe it's 2 miles of the school, you actually don't have to provide transportation to that school. I forget what the exact number was for the mileage, but there was always that law that said, if you're within a certain radius of the school, you don't have to provide transportation. We're providing transportation within a couple miles, obviously. But those are some of the concerns that I have for that. This is the biggest one that across the state it's baffled us a little bit. They used to have this term called sparsity. Sparsity was allocated to districts that had rural schools or districts that were rural themselves. And I mean like extreme rural. For example.
Look, let me give them a history
Yeah.
on that. That actually started back in the 1960s. And what it was for a lot of the systems, there were small schools that were a long way away, and it may have been bad roads to get to them, and there were only about 12 or 13 of them in the state of Georgia. And they were called isolated school grants. And they gave a grant for them because it was either almost impossible to bring those kids to another school nearby in that district and serve them. We had one of those schools, and it was Woody Gap. And they have always been able to get that money, and that's how we've been able to keep the doors open for Woody Gap, is because of the state funding for that money. Well, somewhere, I noticed about 2 years ago, I guess, on the budget, that number of 13 or so grew to about 30. And it was the name of the thing, it changed from isolated school grants to sparsity grants. So they've taken the whole idea of why those things were set up anyway, and they've changed it to help other systems just find a way to get money, really is what it boils down to. Well, the criteria, you'll talk about the criteria they've set up, would actually eliminate us and Woody Gap from funding on this grant. So that's part of our concern too. And we'll talk more about that too if you want to tell them a little about that set up.
The way it works, and a lot of this really benefits those districts in South Georgia. A lot of them, when you think about, there's one district in Georgia, I think Tolliver is the smallest, and they've got maybe a couple hundred kids, K-12. Baker County's got like 350 students, K-12. So when you're talking about a school, wherever it's located, having to go to the corners of every county for just maybe 6 kids on a bus, that's challenging. The state did the right thing in the fact that they added money in for these systems, especially in South Georgia, that are extremely rural schools. But they called it low enrollment, low density. The low enrollment says any school district fewer than 3,500 kids. That's us. So we meet that. It says district with student per square mile less than 6. We're actually a little over 8. So we meet one, but not the other. What they're doing is the way they allocate the money, they give $225 per student of the difference less than 3,500. So if you're 10 students shy of that 3,500, you just get $2,250. Then they also do $225 per student per square mile difference multiplied by the district square mile. So if you have 400 square miles, you take 400 times that 225, and you look at the number difference there. But the biggest challenge that we see with this, as you factor this in, a lot more districts came on. In our region, we were the only ones who ever received sparsity. Under a version a little over a week ago, Rabun, Towns, and Banks were also added, but now only Rabun County will still be in there permanently. Banks County, I'm sorry. Banks County will be in there permanently. So what does that mean for us? This is the part that just amazes me. When you go into it and you start to look at, now they're going to remove districts from that eligibility. So they're saying any district that doesn't have a millage rate of 13 by July 1st, 2017 is automatically eliminated from it. So any district basically has a year and a half, or a little bit more than that, to be at 13 mills, or 13 and a half by 2018, or 14 mills by 2019. Now, keep in mind, this says this is an absolute requirement to receive, or for eligibility to receive any funding in this grant. So what they're saying is, we're not going to give you this money unless you've gone up on your taxes as much as you can. But hold on, we get to look at Woody Gap and how it affects us, because it's a positive, we think.
Well, a little history on that too. We noticed that our funding for Woody Gap kept going down from the state. And it went down to, I think, last year, the year before last, 256,000. And it's a good thing, we got some good legislators here. Steve Gooch, he was one of the ones I called and asked to come in, and I wanted to show him and explain to him what was happening. Well, he understood, and he kind of went to bat for us. He and some other, John Wilkinson from down in a little further south there in Stevens County, they actually went to bat for us on this thing, and they got our money back up to 400,000, which it had been at one time. So that's where we're at right now. So I felt really good about that, and that's got some implications for this formula too. But my concern is, they've added us back, and we're the only, Woody Gap is the only system and school in the state that's getting that money that doesn't meet their formula. So we're held
We get an
harmless.
asterisk, basically.
So what happens when this passes the legislature, and it's everything's out there, and if they come back and they say, we're not gonna fund that $400,000 for Woody Gap anymore, then what are we gonna do? Are we gonna close it down? Or are we gonna raise taxes here, make up the difference? I mean, that's why I wanted to talk to y'all, because y'all need to know about some of these things that's on the horizon. They're putting us in a real hard situation where there's gonna have to be some tough choices the next few years on this funding formula.
When you continue to look at some of the eligibility things that they're removing, they say remove from eligibility any district that meets only one enter in the top quintile of tax digest per student. Well, that's actually Union County. So we shouldn't meet it there, because we're in the top 20% of tax digest per student. Now keep in mind, what they do is they take our entire digest and divide it by those 2,700 students that we have. Rabun County is number 1 in the state of Georgia on that list. They also then say retain districts that are in the top quintile but meet both. But then here's the part that was kind of odd that Mr. Stepp alluded to. When you're reading through their narrative, they have this paragraph at the bottom that says all districts currently earning sparsity funds qualify under this methodology except 2, Towns County and Union County. However, the amount of $400,324 equivalent to FY16 sparsity grant for Union County has been added to the low-density, low-enrollment grants in support of Woody Gap School. Then it goes on to say a hold harmless allocation has been included for Towns County. Fortunately for us, it doesn't say anything about hold harmless with Woody Gap. Fortunately, we also have papers back from 68-ish, I believe, showing where we were an isolated school. So they've got this in there now, but it was after Mr. Stepp had a conversation with a few different people to make sure we got the funding we deserved for Woody Gap.
You know, I got to mention this to one of the superintendents today, alluded to the fact about this formula they come up with is okay and there's nothing wrong with it. And it said it'd take a lot of the game in the system out. But honestly, a superintendent is supposed to give the best education possible for the students in his district and do it for the least amount of burden on the taxpayers. And that's what we do. We work a lot behind the scenes with people like our senators and our legislators to try to make these things happen and watch to make sure that they're not taking money away from us. Some of these things, I'm not sure we can stop. I'm not sure this is already a done deal. I know it's got to go to the legislature, but there's some reason I'll explain later why I think it's going to be hard to stop this train. I think it's already left the station.
Just a few more slides. This is the rest of the amount. So everything you saw on the tables prior to this slide, about $7.6 billion. Teacher retirement system, the state does put in some money for the teacher retirement system, which is about $1 billion. The health insurance is another on there, and that cost has gone up, Lord knows how much, over the last 5 years, but it's just continued to increase. Right now, we pay $945 per staff per month. So take 940 times 12, and that's what we pay per month, just as a system. That does not include what the employee then selects as their plan and what they have to pay as a premium. So there's about 30% of the salary cost that the school system has to pay because of some of these things in there. Equalization. How many of you are familiar or have heard of equalization before? All right, here's what they do. They take all those school districts. We talk about the property wealth per student. So you have all the property, the tax digest, and you rank order from 1 all the way down to 180. There's 180 traditional school districts in Georgia. In other words, city and county. When you look at those districts, they've cut it off, I believe, now at number 60. Anybody below number 60 winds up getting equalization money. What that means is everybody puts money into the pot. You'll see this local fair share right here. They keep about $5.5 million of our money at the state that gets then redistributed across the state.
That's your property tax money.
The equivalent of it, yeah. What they don't, it's not an additional into what's there. They just say, by the way, you should be getting this, but we're going to keep it to help
We're
fund
going to
other places.
redistribute it.
Some of that money winds up going to other districts. Some of it goes to just that big pot that helps fund education in our system and in other systems. But a lot of that winds up going to equalization. About 4 years ago, when the economy, right after it tanked a little bit, Gwinnett County all of a sudden went into equalization. So that meant they all of a sudden dropped below that number 60 in those rankings.
How much money do you think they get at equalization last year?
Just under $90 million.
88 million.
Yeah,
Plus out of this new formula, if it's funded, they'll get 27 additional
on
million.
top of that. So the districts that have those large tax digests are benefiting even more from this. The smaller districts that seem to be doing a pretty good job, we're the ones that are getting hit a little bit. But you'll see that local fair share comes out to about 1.7 billion. They've taken that out. So in a way, you can look at it and look at health insurance and teacher retirement. You're looking at just over $2 billion. So local fair share comes about 400 million shy of paying just for the TRS and the health insurance. But the equalization, all of that set up back on the mid-'80s when that QBE went through. The biggest challenge was in QBE, number one, they started austerity cuts back in 2002 or 2003. We're still going to be about $220 million shy of it being fully funded at the state level. But what that means is that's an amount that they used in the past to balance the budget. So you know what? We need to balance the budget this year. We need $500 million to balance the budget this year, so we're going to take an equal amount percentage-wise from every school district, and then you got to adjust your budgets locally.
Now that started not last recession, but the economic downturn from back in 2003.
So even
We
when
got
it
our
got better
midterm
for a
report. The
few
first
years-
time I ever saw, there was a line item on our budget, austerity reduction, and it was in red. And I had to call somebody in the state and said, "What is this austerity reduction? I never seen anything like that on a budget from the state." And they said, "That's money that we can't fund you, that we're asking you to give us back from what we normally fund you to help us balance the budget." And they kept taking that money and kept taking that money, and they've only gave just a portion of it back. My fear is, their plan is that when this new formula goes in, they're gonna wipe the slate clean, and they won't ever pay us back for that money that they never funded to start with. And that's when we had to raise taxes here and stuff to where we're at now. We're still one of the lowest tax rates in the state, but we probably wouldn't have to do that if we hadn't had the austerity cuts.
The big thing about austerity, there was a 3-year window there before the second crash where they had a chance to put the money back into the pot, but they didn't. And so we've lost over the last 12 years about $12 million total from the state, in addition to the $5.5 million a year from the local fair share.
I got a question. I'm new to the area, but I'm listening to you guys talk about the money that you're sending to the state. My question is, why? Can you take that money, the $5 million, and provide an education that will give these teachers raises and operate this school district without having the state tell you what to do? Can you do that? Legally? Maybe not
No,
legally, but could you
couldn't
do
do
it?
it
Well,
legally.
and the reason you can't do it legally is because we never see that money.
I wouldn't do it. I'd get out of that program.
The state collects it, and that's,
They don't give you the option.
the other challenge about this too is we're dealing with numbers that were based on 1986. Right now, every regular teacher gets 12 and a half days a year to take off. 3 for personal and 9 and a half, did the math right, right? Yeah, 9 and a half for sick leave. I'll get you in just a second. And we get a total of $150 for those 12 and a half days. So we can't even pay a sub, maybe one, or ours, yeah, 2 days. We get 2 days that we can pay a sub out of that money. Yes, sir.
I was listening to you, and you were telling me about the teachers that you had to go in and you evaluate in 100 hours. You talk about 1,000. That's 1,000 hours of teaching time that these teachers could be using instead of spending the time
Yeah,
evaluating.
I have
Well,
I have a theory about that. I think in education we have 2 things. We have negative time and positive time. I classify the negative time as when you're doing a lot of things that are not productive for the education of kids. And then there's the positive things that you're planning on programs, you're planning on new activities, new things they can do that make learning much more fun and more exciting for the kids. And I see a lot of our administrators being tied up on the negative stuff, doing a lot of other stuff that's really not focusing on what's helping kids become better educated and better ready for the world that's ahead of them. So some of this stuff, we get bogged down with a lot of stuff that I'm not sure has the value. But
There's a big disconnect many times from the State Department and the school system as far as, it's been a while since some of them have been in the school system, to know that if you're really focused on what you're supposed to focus on is the kids. I would say there's probably an average of a webinar or some meeting every other day that the Department of Education would want to host. And we miss them because it's just not worth our time.
You told me about that conference you went to recently.
Yeah, I'll give
How
you
many
one, yeah.
slides? How many slides? is
Well,
this?
we're getting monitored this year for federal programs that you get monitored about every 3 or 4 years. And myself and a couple others went down and went to the presentation. It's a 159-page handout, 2 slides per page, and they read it verbatim. Because apparently we can't read and comprehend. So it was just a big challenge for us. We sent us, okay, come on, send this out in an email. If we've got questions, set up a time for us to ask questions. Because a system like ours, we don't receive millions of dollars in federal dollars to help support a Title I program or a Title II program. We don't have a neglected and delinquent program. We don't have a full-blown migrant program or immigrant program. These other systems do, these larger systems do. Well, I don't need to be here for all that mess. You know, let's focus on what I need and then let's get out. But that waste part is actually fairly common, unfortunately, from the state level of required this and required that, and you have to do. It's only gotten worse. Last year, I believe there were 3 new state mandates we had to implement as a school system. One was the milestones, one was the teacher keys evaluation system, and the other one was the student learning objectives, which is the pre and post test we give the kids. So in 1 year, we basically couldn't do anything that we felt like was best for our kids because the state was telling us what to do with our kids. And so some stuff had to get put on hold for a while. What's interesting too, as you continue to look at this, there's about $4.4 million that districts are losing. There are 11 districts, I believe, in the state of Georgia that are losing money in this. Had it not been for Woody Gap, we would have been the second highest percentage loss in the state of Georgia. We're actually on the positive by about 86,000. But if you take away that 400,000, we would have been the second highest percentage loss in the state of Georgia. Number 1 is Towns County. And so it puts those of us up in our area in a bind. Reagan County's up there as well. What they did is this hold harmless amount. They just added this amount back in, but what they're adding total to the current budget is about $258 million. The problem is, there's still $220 million in austerity at the state level that hasn't been restored from back in '02. Forget the accumulation of all those years, that's just for 1 year, they're still 220 million short. So they're kind of saying, well, you can forget the old way of doing Quality Basic Education Act, here's the way you're getting funded now. And Mr. Stepp has asked this question before, is the goal of this to determine what it takes to educate a child in Georgia, or is it, here's the amount of money you're gonna get to educate a child in Georgia, which are two completely different sides of the coin. We fear that it's the latter.
Yeah, and there's no way of knowing, the future will tell what'll happen, but my gut feeling is, and I'm gonna be retired and gone, but I still love education and I want the best for our kids. My fear is that they're shifting the burden of education from the state level, as it mandates in the Constitution of Georgia, to the local level, where it's gonna come down. If you wanna give teachers raises, you're gonna have to raise taxes here locally to do it. They're gonna cap that salary schedule, I'm afraid. I'm afraid they're gonna hold harmless that $89 million he showed you on that first slide. They'll take that away as soon as that hold harmless period runs out. So the only other alternative that you will have to raise money in Union County for education will be through your local taxes on property. And that goes back to my opening remarks about I had a real concern about what's coming down the pike.
That
Yeah.
might not really be a bad idea. That way we can tell them to go pound salt. And you won't have to put up with all this nonsense, and you can educate, which I know you guys are dedicated to doing. You can educate
When you,
Well,
when you look at, we pull in about 1.1 million per meal. So we're slightly under 12. So you can see we're about, a little over 13 million there locally. If you're talking about the amount of money we were supposed to get from austerity all those years, plus then that $5.5 million, I mean, that's cutting it in half.
But I'm giving you the Social Security hijack.
They'll never tell you this, but I think that they looked at what the property taxes were across the state of Georgia, from top to bottom. They took all the systems up here in the north. We manage our money pretty doggone good. We're one of the lowest tax rates around. And most of our counties around us are similar. But they took those, and those are the ones that's getting the whammy that you're gonna have to raise up to the state average on the tax, or you're not gonna get any money from them. They're gonna cut your money from the state level and force you to raise taxes on a local level.
I took all 180 districts and compared them to their millage rate from the previous year, and there was a 0.4 correlation across the 180 districts, minus a handful that for some reason didn't state what their millage rate was. So you're looking at a significant correlation across 180 different samples that show basically the lower your local millage rate is, the less money you're going to be getting from the state. And when you've got districts like, I mentioned, and I'll reiterate this again, when you look at Pioneer RESA districts, we are going to get about 1.5% increase across those. Actually, it's going to be less than that now, because that was before Raven and Towns losing money. So you're going to be in the low 1% of the increase from 1 year to the next based on this formula. When you look at the top 25 enrollment districts, so Gwinnett and down, because they've got about 160,000 kids, they're getting a 3.5% increase in their funds. When you look at the small rural South Georgia districts,
Who need the funding?
who they need it, they're getting a nice increase. I don't know why they just didn't take that amount that's in austerity and reallocate it to the South Georgia systems and just be done with it and use the current system, but I guess that's too simple. What we fear is that the reason we believe this is kind of done already is when you've got the metro area districts getting theirs, you've got South Georgia districts getting theirs, and you got about 75% of the state of Georgia getting a bump, and it only leaves a very small percentage left out there. They know that if it goes to the legislature, it's going to pass because they've got the votes they need to make it pass. We fear that, we don't know when, we feel like this is already in motion. What we don't know is when it's going to take effect. They may pass it in the 2016 legislature, but it may not go into effect until 17 or 18. To give districts time to figure out compensation models, to give districts time to figure out, Lord of mercy, what are you going to do? Because we do well at what we do now. We've generated a good bit of money over the last few years from the state to offset that austerity. Because insurance rates continue to go up. They actually go up 150 for our classified staff every year for the last 5 or 6 years. And that's $150 per month